Space stations. They're pretty cool, and something we are currently unable to achieve without first demonstrating we can get two spacecraft to meet and join together. In this episode of Kerbal Gets Real Redux, we are going to attempt to do exactly that, perform the first docking in this series. Not only that, but we're also going to really start pushing towards landing a crew on the moon before the decade is out, and working on the largest launch complex the Earth Aeronautics and Space Administration has ever seen. And this is where I would show you that I picked up crewed lunar surface exploration if my OBS didn't record a green screen and no audio whatsoever. I did mention it in the last episode that my footage got corrupted, and the first couple of months of 1965 are nowhere to be seen, including, yes, me picking up the crewed lunar surface exploration program, which was a very big deal. In order to achieve this, I had to complete the geostationary program as well as the early interplanetary probes program, both of which I'd finished the objectives for before last year, and that does mean we still have the advanced crewed orbit program active. We can't complete that yet, we haven't performed a docking. And that's exactly what we are launching right now, the GDT on the 18th of February. This is the Garrison docking target. In the last episode, I couldn't decide between rendezvous test, rendezvous target, but no, this is definitely the docking target. Not the docking test, it's the docking target. And if I say docking test, please feel free to go down into the comments and laugh at me because I have messed up my voiceover. It's something that I do frequently. It's not that great, but it's usually quite funny when it happens. Anyway, we are able to launch this on a Thunderbolt 5, which is absolutely fantastic because the Thunderbolt 5 is such a cheap launch vehicle. Honestly, if I could get a crew to the moon on that, I would. Well, you wouldn't, because it can only take about 800 kilograms to low Earth orbit. It's really not all that capable, but it is cheap, and that's exactly why I'm using it for this vehicle. And so, the aim of this mission is to prove that we can launch a vessel to space with a docking port on it, launch a crewed capsule at a separate time, and I do have a Garrison III being built up right now in order to achieve that, get them to rendezvous, meet together, and then dock. And we're going to be doing this for a couple of reasons. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, this is the precursor to space stations. They are one of the best things about KSP to me, and I've always had a great time building space stations. And this is proving that we can do that. I've never built a space station in RSS with Principia, so this will be the first time that I do attempt something like that, and I'm very much looking forward to doing that. And now the other reason why we are going to show that we can dock two spacecraft together in orbit, and I'm fairly sure this was one of the main reasons why they did it in real life as well. When I go to the moon and when I land on the moon, I am not going to do a direct descent. I'm going to go for the Apollo architecture, in that I will have an orbiter flying around the moon with a separate lander that lands on the moon and then takes off, rendezvous with the orbiter, docks together, and then sends the crew back home on the orbiter. And now the reason why I'm doing this is because, quite frankly, you need a much smaller launch vehicle to be able to do that. Honestly, Apollo style is the way to go if we really want to cut back on the mass of our crewed lunar launcher. Anyway, now on the 31st of March, we are ready to launch Garrison III too, which is going to be the crewed spacecraft that will dock with the Garrison docking target. This has launched a little later than I would have liked. I would have liked this to have gone up maybe about a week after the docking target. However, when I simulated this, as does tend to be the case when I fly most crewed missions, especially if I've been away from KSP for a while, which I had at this point, I discovered there was a crippling flaw in the design of the Garrison, which meant that it had to be rolled back to the VAB, changed up, and then rolled back out to the launch pad. And that crippling flaw was actually an attempt to fix something that went wrong in the last episode, in that for some reason the petal fairings that connected the launch vehicle to the Garrison capsule were doubled up, and if you go back to the last episode you can see them clipping through each other. Now I fixed that, but unfortunately I placed the Garrison capsule on the interstage node that does not decouple, and that meant when I flew it in the sim, it did not get to space. It was a disaster. So I had to fix that, and yeah, now we're launching this again, and this time it goes a lot better than it did in the simulation that I tried out. Although for some reason, Mech Ascent Guidance didn't want to decouple the first stage from the second stage, so I had to go and do that manually. That was a little bit strange, and I'm not entirely sure what was causing that. I did check, and my staging was all correct. The second stage, which is firing now, is comprised of 5 RL-10s, and they are still only the basic bare bones RL-10. This stage does not have anywhere near as much thrust at all. Even if I burn all 5 of these to completion, we're still barely going to be pushing a thrust-to-weight ratio of about 2, so this I can keep all engines on until the spacecraft makes it to orbit, which it has done, and unfortunately, I did not set my avionics to the correct tonnage. The avionics on this can only manage 5 tons, and this thing weighs 5.23, so in order to get get over this, I turned to a very handy mod called Ship Manifest. Now, this mod isn't included in the RP1 Express install, but there are a lot of useful features that it has that means I always include it on my RP1 games. One of them being the ability to rename Kerbals, which I have used it for to rename some of the Kerbals in my series after patrons, although I'm not going to be doing that going forward because unfortunately it does actually mess up their retirement dates. So in the future, when I change names, I am going to have to go into the save file and edit them manually. But it also allows you to dump fuel and transfer fuel a lot better than the stock system does. It's actually probably more akin to the way that it's done in KSP2, and I actually quite like the way that KSP2 handles fuel transfers. And in order to get over my avionics problem, I just dumped some of the fuel that the advanced AJ10 is going to use because this is overbuilt. It doesn't need as much Delta V in it as it does, and I was able to dump that fuel and I regained control of the spacecraft, and now what we are doing is trying to get our rendezvous all set up with the probe. Last episode, I did mess up the rendezvous with Principia a bit. It had been a while since I'd done a rendezvous in Principia. I was a little bit rusty and I kind of read the map a little bit wrong. This time round though, I have been a little bit more practiced. I did a rendezvous last time. I kind of know what I'm doing again. So I have got a much better encounter. You can see we are only going to be about 250 meters away, which is much better than the 4 kilometers that I was when I attempted to rendezvous with the Garrison rendezvous target in the last episode. I probably could have got it a little bit closer as well with a few small adjustments of RCS, but I thought 240 meters means that we're not going to be going crashing into that probe with a crew of 2 on board. I really don't want to be killing anyone, and George Edwards and Thierry Petit are currently my only astronauts that have actually flown to space, or Kerbal Nauts, or whatever you want to call them. I guess it's real solar system, maybe astronauts. Do we call them I don't know. But yes, I don't want to be killing the only 2 Kerbals that I have sent to space. I do have more, but at the moment they're not trained up, and we will get to see them fly very soon. Anyway, the rendezvous was completely finished, performed. It was much better. And now we have docked the 2 spacecraft together. I did mention in the last video that the RCS control on the first iteration of the Garrison launch vehicle, or the Garrison III, wasn't very good, and it was very hard to actually control the spacecraft with RCS, do some fine adjustments. So I did add another set of RCS thrusters on the top of the Garrison, I changed the RCS on the bottom, and now I can move it around quite easily. A lot easier than I did in the last episode anyway. And this meant that it was actually really easy to dock with the probe as well. I can't recall if I used MechJeb's docking autopilot for this dock, or if I did it manually. It could have been either, I don't mind doing both. I'm going to say that I use MechJeb because I got cinematics of it docking, so I assume that I probably use MechJeb so I could just leave it, do its thing, and film it without any UI. Now what we're doing is we're actually going to be waiting around low Earth orbit for a bit because there are some long duration experiments on this Gemini that I want to complete. And I also want to try and keep them in space for as long as possible. This has been the longest we have stayed in orbit with a crew on board, at 6 days and 2 hours. But now we are going to be bringing George and Thierry back down. I couldn't stay any longer than this, and the reason for that is I was actually running out of resources. I was running out of oxygen, and future iterations of this Gemini capsule are going to have a liquid oxygen to gaseous oxygen converter on board. This is something that I didn't have for this flight, but as soon as I get that, that means that the Gemini can probably stay in orbit for about 14 days before I have to start worrying about running out of resources. So we will see much longer duration flights of this capsule in the future, but not for now. We need to unlock the technology that allows us to convert liquid oxygen to gaseous oxygen before we do that. But that is something that I'm going to be doing when I go to the moon, because my moon mission is going to be using a Gemini capsule. I'm going to use the Lunar Gemini, and the main reason for that is it's going to be so much cheaper than unlocking Apollo. It does only mean that I can get 2 Kerbals to the moon, but I just really can't afford Apollo if I want to beat real life time. This time round for atmospheric entry, I did turn on descent mode for the capsule, which meant that the return to Earth was much more comfortable for both George and Thierry. Completing that mission still didn't push back anyone's retirement date, and I was really worried now because George is going to retire later on in this year. Currently, the only way that I can increase that is by sending her on mission training. Not ideal. With first docking done, I can now finish the Advanced Crewed Orbit contract, but I'm not going to do that quite yet because I don't really have anything else to pick up. Well, I do, but we'll get onto that later. Because right now, the first iteration of Colossus has been designed, and that means I am going to be building a new launch complex just for this. Now, I'm not going to show the build for this because this isn't actually the final design that I am going to fly to send Kerbals to the moon. When I get to that, I will do a build for it because in the last episode that I released before recording this voiceover, many people did say that they did want to see those build sections, and actually they did quite like the reverse build section of Pinnacle that I did. So I'm going to show you that for Colossus when I get to the final iteration of it and I'm about to build it to fly it in the series. With the new administration building upgrade completed, giving me 8 slots meant that I could pick up the Earth Space Station program. Now, if you are playing regular P&LC, this will not be activated on your save. You actually have to go into the RP1 configs to enable this. And there is also another problem in that there are currently no contracts tied to this program. I could probably go through the contracts and have a look and see if I can activate some of those as well, but if there are no contracts, I'm just going to try and complete the contract that it wants me to do anyway. I'm going to hazard a guess at what a first space station is meant to be and what an improved space station is meant to be, and then send crew to them and basically try and complete the program without actually completing any of the contracts. I do need to take a look into game data and see if I can do this a bit more normally, but that's why I picked this up. Also, it pays me a lot of funding. And as mentioned at the beginning of this video, space stations is something I really want to be getting into, and I'm definitely going to need that injection of money if I'm wanting to attempt some of those. Anyway, I feel I have quite a bit more to talk about that, but right now we are really cutting into Garrison III's time, and this is launched on the 26th of August, and basically all this is going to be doing is completing one of the orbital flights with maneuvers contracts that I was given as part of the Advanced Crewed Orbit program. Now, I know I don't have that program anymore, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is how programs and launch complexes works, in that if you pick up a contract from a program, it doesn't automatically fail if you complete that program. And I have completed the Advanced Crewed Orbit program, but I still have this contract available to me because I picked it up before I completed the program. But yeah, I do need to do a little bit more testing on this because I'm fairly sure this isn't how it's supposed to work, but that might just be me getting it wrong. Or alternatively, it could be another one of the problems that was called from changing Earth to Kerbin. I don't know. I need to look into this a little bit more, or maybe I'll just ask the RP1 dev team. They're pretty good at letting me know these kind of things. So since recording that voiceover, I did go and ask the RP1 dev team, and Sumav very helpfully, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, very helpfully told me that this shouldn't have happened and that I have somehow got something that I should not have. So I am going to put this down to the whole Earth becoming Kerbin bug, and if you are playing along with this series, or if you are playing your own P&LC campaign, don't do this because it won't work for you. I have broken my game somehow, and I always seem to do this. In the old Kerbal Gets Real, I had a level 3 research and development from the very start. In this one, I have completely screwed up Earth several times. It is now back to Earth in the save, and yeah, and I also forgot to up the avionics once again on the Garrison capsule. But yes, Earth is Earth again, but there are still a few problems at this point in the save that I hadn't fixed, such as the issues with me being unable to hire a new chief scientist or chief admin. I do fix these later on by going into the save file and messing around with it for a bit until I can basically make it work again, but it is a problem, and hopefully I don't have to deal with any more problems like this in the future. I know some people were requesting or recommending me getting RSS Origin, which adds a huge amount of new celestial bodies to the game, and I don't think I'm going to do this. As much as it would be nice to have things like Haumea and maybe some extra asteroids from the asteroid belt, it's really not going to play nicely with the fact that I've got Principia on this install, and I did mention it in the comments of the last video, and someone told me that they had tried it with Principia and basically it made their game not run at all, and that was in a completely new save. I really don't want to do anything more to this save that could put it at jeopardy. I want this save to carry on for a while yet, and I'm going to try everything I can in my power to ensure that that happens. Anyway, Garrison III performs the mission objectives that it needs to, and it is able to stay in the orbits that are so required, and now we are bringing it back down to Earth. And George and Thierry get a rather awesome view of some fireworks as the service module blows up in the atmosphere behind them. I do tend to decouple the service module a little later than I should, and that has caused some very near misses, some of which are still to come, that may be in the next episode, or it might be the episode after. I can't remember off the top of my head, but there is one that is coming that almost ended in complete disaster, and you will see that when it comes. But this time, luckily, George and Thierry are more than capable of surviving the rigorous re-entry procedure that is getting back through Earth's atmosphere. And once again, I do use descent mode because descent mode makes this a lot more manageable. It means that we're only going to be pulling at max, I think, about 6 Gs, which is a lot better than the upwards of 15 that we would be experiencing if I did not turn descent mode on. Descent mode is great if you want to stop your Kerbals from being turned into green pancakes. I was, however, a little concerned that this would be the first time that we land one of these Gemini capsules on land, but thankfully, due to descent mode, it does push the landing site back and we come crashing down in the Atlantic Ocean. And now, because Earth is Earth again, that means George and Thierry's retirement date actually gets pushed back from completing a mission around Earth. This was a huge sigh of relief to me, although George is still going to retire midway through next year, so I am going to have to keep sending her on missions, which is a little bit of a shame because I do have other Kerbals that I do want to be sending on missions as well. I mean, she is my favourite Kerbal, having been with me from the very start, but there are other Kerbals that deserve the opportunity to go to space too. With the science gained from that mission, I pick up advanced jet engines, space station era electronics research, and 1970 to 71 orbital rocketry. Then with the Colossus complex set to 70% and the astronaut complex set to 40, it's a warp ahead to November, where the Pinnacle launch complex has been working on the next Shackleton mission, and this is to go back to Venus, which we tried to do in the last episode. Unfortunately, test flight said no. We are going back with the intention of landing. Now, I do have a Venus orbital science probe contract, and once again, I shouldn't have this, but I'm going to attempt to do it. So that means on the 22nd of November, 1965, Shackleton VII is launched on top of a Pinnacle rocket. Now, Shackleton VII, I wanted to be the exact same design as Shackleton V, because I really liked how Shackleton V looked. I tested it out in simulations and it worked. The only reason why that mission failed is because test flight in the last episode said no. Unfortunately, as I did mention in the last episode, I overwrit that file with Shackleton VI, which didn't have a lander on it, and that one went to Mars and also failed. Because last time round, test flight was really testing my patience. I had so many failures, and thankfully over the course of this episode there have been none yet so far. He says as still attempting to fly another mission, and that could have disastrous consequences that were unforeseen. Would I mention test flight failures in a launch? Trying to jinx it? I don't know, you'll just have to wait and see. What was I just on about? There was absolutely nothing to worry about, and the Pinnacle got Shackleton VII to orbit just fine, and now we are sending our probe on its way to Venus by performing its trans-Venus injection burn. I skipped out a lot of the fluff of this launch because, to be honest, we saw this exact same mission profile in the last episode, and I didn't want to go over things that I have already done. But now I think is a good time to actually talk about the differences between test flight and test light, because I have seen comments and people have asked me on the live chat, especially when I did the lunar landing live stream, if I have an engine failure and I've still got ignitions on the engine, why don't I just relight it? And the answer is, with test flight, you can't. If you have an ignition failure on an engine, even if it has 20 ignitions left, you can't fire up that engine again. It's just a feature of test flight. This is something that you could do in test light, which was the recommended failure mod that I was using when I did the original Kerbal Gets Real, and that's what I had. And to me, this makes test flight a little bit more punishing. But test flight is now the recommended mod, and it's the one I'm using, so I can no longer relight engines once they've failed. But we don't have to worry about that at all with this mission, because we are now on our way. The trajectory is all plotted out. We are going to be flying by incredibly close, and I've also plotted out my capture burn. So once we arrive, all I gotta do is hope that the engine's on this far up, and actually I know they're going to, because I am using generic thrusters which have no failure chance whatsoever. The only thing that might still fail is the separation motors that are going to deorbit the lander to Venus, but that is so infinitesimally small that I'm fairly sure that I do not have anything to fear. But it would be just my luck for something like that to go wrong. With that mission on its way, it's back into the vehicle assembly building to modify the Pinnacle launch complex, and the reason for this is I need to make it human rated, or Kerbal rated, because I have come up with a design that can use the Pinnacle to send a crew of 2 to orbit the moon. And that is definitely something we're going to be seeing next episode. We are going to be sending our Kerbals to another celestial body for the first time in this series, in 1966. A little later than I did in the original Kerbal Gets Real, but still, P&LC is a lot harder, okay? I know there are some people that have done it incredibly quickly, but clearly I have not been applying the pro speedrunner strats for this run. But once again, we find ourselves on the 1st of January 1966, and over the course of this year, expect to see our first crew sent to the moon. Not only that, but we're also going to get crew other than George and Thierry to space. Absolute madness. There may also be a few new exciting interplanetary ventures over the course of this year to some very far-flung locations. Now I'm going to say now, this is going to be the last time that 2 episodes of Kerbal Gets Real Redux airs a week. You've had 4 weeks of 2 episodes. I can't keep carrying on like this. I just don't have the time. However, I am still aiming for 1 episode a week, and I want your input. I want to know, would you rather see the episodes on Friday or Sunday? I'm going to stick with one of those 2 days, as has been the case over the past 4 weeks. Just let me know which one you'd rather prefer in the comments, and I will try and see what the general consensus is, and that will be when future episodes will be uploaded. Hopefully I will be able to get a bulk load of these edited all at once, so I can ensure uploads for quite some time yet. And not only that, it does mean that I can work on some other videos as well. I know there wasn't a short this week, but that's because I have been incredibly busy this week, and also somewhat accidentally ended up in accident and emergency too. That wasn't good. That was really not good. But anyway, we are really now starting to steam towards, well, steam, is that the right word? Rocket towards our first crewed lunar landing. A big thanks to KC, CDR San, Opus, Redstone Wizard, Shadow Dev, Y Mandarin, Cameron Westbury, Chris Morrison, Darth Malachor, Mr. Blue Star, Rail Cowgirl, Ryan Miller, Zenon, and the rest of my patrons and members for their continued support. I have been Carnassa, and I will see you later.